Hi, everyone. This is going to be, I think, a very long and depressing video. So, if you want a feel good experience, you probably shouldn't watch or listen to this. Um, I just want to kind of give a little bit of my own perspective and opinions about the whole story of Space Venture and its development. Um, and I'm not necessarily very qualified to talk about it because I don't have the game. I right now, as I'm making this video in mid-September 2022, the game's just been released, but it was only released right now to Kickstarter backers, which I'm not one of. I didn't back the game on Kickstarter, so I have not. I don't have the game. I have not played it personally. I have seen some YouTube videos. People who have the game have already started making YouTube videos. So I've already seen some feedback and seen some of the game, but this is not really so much about the game itself. Anyway, more just a little background story, which I think other people have already told, but I'll tell it anyway, just because I don't know, just because I'm so long-winded that maybe I'll say something that other people haven't said. Um, but to be fair, I didn't follow every event that story, in this story very closely. Yeah, sorry. I'm actually recording this live. Like the scene that you're seeing from Space Quest 5 is actually playing out live, so you'll get those pop-ups occasionally. Funnily enough, WD-40 never shows up here if you just stand here. I just thought this would be something nice to look at, just like a sort of a relaxing water scene, which we can look at while I'm droning on, even though we're being chased by a killer robot, but she never shows up if you just stand here. Anyway, so yeah, so like I was saying, I didn't actually follow the whole story of the game's development that closely, because it's a story that goes on for more than 10 years. I was sort of keeping track of the progress on Space Venture occasionally, but I didn't diligently check the updates every day, or even every week, or even every month during the 10 plus years that the game was being developed. So there is a lot of stuff which I'm sure I missed. There's a lot of stuff I don't know. I'm just here saying what I do know and what I do think. But if anybody has something to add, if you have anything to add, if you think I've missed something important or, I don't know, misrepresented something because of my ignorance, lack of awareness of what I'm talking about, feel free to correct me in the comments or add your own opinions. But yeah, I'll start. I'll start with the general introduction. The two guys from Andromeda are Mark Crow and Scott Murphy. They're usually cited in that order. I rarely hear Scott Murphy and Mark Crow, so I don't know if they agreed that Mark should be named first, or if people just do it that way out of convention. I have no idea. But anyway, these two guys are the guys who made the original Space Quest games, one of which you're seeing now, although actually this one was mostly developed, I think, more by Mark. I think Scott had kind of gotten shuffled out of the picture at this point, and this was more Mark's work. But anyway, that's neither here nor there right now. These two guys are a good team because they have different talents and different styles. When you make a team, you don't want people who have similar talents. A good team has people with different talents and abilities which complement each other. And I think that's one of the reasons why the two guys worked out well, because they're pretty different people. Mark Crow was and is an artist. He makes art. He draws visual art for computer games and stuff like that, which is obviously useful in a graphical computer game where each screen has a scene. Like there's this background picture, and then there are characters and objects which will be visible on the top of that scene. So that's Mark, and meanwhile, Scott Murphy is a writer. If you remember these sometimes very dark, the Space Quest games sometimes had a very dark and sarcastic kind of sense of humor, which is very pervasive throughout the series. That's basically Scott's voice. He has a very dark sense of humor, and it's sometimes, I guess you could say, kind of insulting, but that's his style, and it is what it is. Some people like it, some people don't. But I mean, obviously enough people liked it that the Space Quest games became a hit. And so these two guys, they have different abilities and different areas of specialty, but they both kind of have a love for cheesy science fiction stuff. They love, sort of I guess, kind of science fiction B movie stuff. Um, and they both have an offbeat sense of humor, which lends itself well to a sort of science fiction setting, especially a parody science fiction setting, which Space Quest was. So they were a natural choice, or they were natural choices to make science fiction computer games. So they made several Space Quest games back in the day. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you may well remember those games. But they kind of had a falling out, and I don't know the whole details about that. I mean, it's there's speculation whenever people get into a rather public feud. There's speculation about what were the causes, why did they split up. It happens when music groups break up because people get into a fight, or celebrity couples or whatever. Anyway, I don't know. That's not really important now. But they kind of had a falling out. I think they didn't talk to each other for several years. But in 2012, which is 10 years ago, actually a little bit more than 10 years ago, because this started in, like, I think early 2012, the two guys just kind of got back together. I don't know the whole circumstances of how they got back together and why, like who initiated the contact and what was the occasion, whatever. But it doesn't really matter now. So the two guys got to talking again. They said, "Hey, let's make another game. It would be fun." And so they set out to do exactly that. And these two guys were joined by a gentleman named Chris Pope, who is an internet personality known for some other stuff on the internet. And he became the community manager of SpaceVenture, which was and is the new game that the two guys from Andromeda worked on. So Chris Pope, as far as I know, was the one who wrote most of the updates on the Kickstarter site. He was the one who communicated with the fans about how the game was going, what was happening with it. And I guess he did a pretty good job at the beginning. People liked him. He's a charismatic guy. Things didn't go so well later, but I'll get to that. So these three people, Mark Crow, Scott Murphy, and Chris Pope, sort of formed the central figures of the Space Venture project in its first years. And so, yeah, as so many people do in our times today of indie games that need a lot of money, even though they're indie games, they made a Kickstarter. They went to Kickstarter to try to fund the idea of another game from the two guys from Andromeda. And the Kickstarter was actually successful. It actually slightly exceeded its goal of $500,000. So that's a little over $500,000 that they raised for this game. Again, I want to emphasize, in case it's not clear, I'm not talking about the game you're seeing on the screen now. The game you're seeing on the screen is just like something for reference. It's just something to look at. The game you're seeing is from the early 1990s. It's almost 30 years old. The game I'm talking about, SpaceVenture's, has just come out this year, like a week ago, or less than a week ago even. But yeah, so this game that I'm talking about was developed on a budget of a little over $500,000. And it was backed by a little over 10,000 Kickstarter backers. Those are pretty good numbers, I would say. Those are not bad numbers. It's a promising start for a project like this. So things got off to a great start. Everything seemed to be going well. And Mark and Scott actually made a series of YouTube videos where they, just kind of got together and commented on the original Space Quest games. I think, if I remember right, I think they actually watched like a playthrough. They watched like a full playthrough of the games and commented on the game and, the games as they were watching the video, kind of like, the director's commentary track you sometimes get on DVDs. And considering the rumors and the sort of general understanding that these two guys had been estranged from each other and not talking to each other over some disagreement or whatever for a couple of decades, it was great to see them together again and talking to each other. They were cordial. I mean, maybe they weren't the best of friends, but they seemed to be getting along. As far as I know, their meetings didn't happen in person. It was all voice conferencing over the internet. I think they might have met in person once to make like one video announcing that the Kickstarter was successful, but most of their meetings, as far as I can tell, was like, voice, like internet voice chat, and not actually happening in person. But it doesn't matter. It was a great time full of great hopes. It was really great to see the guys working together again. And I and thousands of other Space Quest fans had great hopes for the future. I remember when the announcement first came out in 2012, I myself posted a I posted a little video of mine, announcing that Space Venture was being kickstarted. But I also commented on their announcement video because, the two guys, of course, they had their own YouTube channel. And I commented on the video where they announced the game, saying it was great to hear that they were back together working on a game. But I implored them to not try to do something too new because this was and is a nostalgia game. And so, obviously the game would be made for Windows. I mean, I don't mean, they didn't literally make like a DOS game or an Apple II game. I think that would not be very viable in our time. It certainly, probably wouldn't attract a lot of attention. But I mean, okay, I understand the game would be made for Windows. That's fine. But I implored them to not get too crazy with the new technology. I told them, don't try to be super impressive with the technology. It's more important to make a game that's fun to play than a game that dazzles you with its techno wizardry, with its amazing graphics and whatever. So, the main thing was that the game should be fun to play and appeal to fans of Space Quest. I told them that, and again, I haven't played Space Venture, but I've seen it, and I personally feel like they didn't maybe listen to that advice enough because it does seem to me like they tried to do a lot of things with the game, which kind of went a little too far into like more current stuff, which creates two problems. The first problem is, I guess it creates three problems. The first problem is it's more work to do. Like, it's technically more difficult to do. It requires a lot more time and effort to make a game like that. The second problem is, of course, it costs more money then because, even though $500,000 sounds like a lot, it's not necessarily that much to develop a whole game. And third, they might risk alienating fans of Space Quest if they make a game that's too new and doesn't feel enough like a Space Quest game. So, so talking about the money, there was some questionable allocation of the money at the beginning. So what they did was they hired some fairly well-known big-name actors, like for the voice acting staff, for the voice actors in Space Venture. They hired people who, not people like, not absolute top-tier people like Brad Pitt or Al Pacino, not on that kind of level, but they hired a few people who are pretty well known. Like they sort of tried to leverage the star power of some of the people who ended up voicing the game, and I feel like that was kind of a questionable decision because research suggests, people actually posted on this in the game's comments on the Kickstarter site. Research suggests that you don't actually get return on investment by paying for well-recognized voice actors to be in your production. You might think that people will go, "Oh, wow, cool! This game is voiced by some well-known or relatively so like at least B-list voiceover actor," but it's not necessarily the case. Whatever that actor those actors are expensive, and whatever you pay for them to get them in your production doesn't necessarily pay off in terms of increased sales. So on the one hand, it is very cool. I have to admit, it is very cool that Ellen McLean, the woman who did the voice of Gladys in Portal, and Portal 2, of course, is in Space Venture. Her voice, she voices the iMom app. There's like an app on, like your character in Space Venture has a smartphone, and he's got an app on it called iMom, which is like a virtual mother. And iMom is voiced by Ellen McLean, the voice of Gladys. That's very cool. But on the other hand, it seems like kind of an extravagance, which an indie team working on a small budget might have done better to go without. It's just my opinion. I don't know. It's not bad. Like, I mean, I welcome Ellen McLean's presence in the game. I mean, it's nice it's kind of cool to hear her voice and think, oh, hey, that's the same woman who voiced Gladys. Like I said, it is very cool. But I think at the beginning, there were some questionable budget decisions, which are difficult to quantify because I don't think they've released, the actual, like they haven't released a budget sheet showing where the money went, where people's $500,000 went, and they probably won't. I don't expect that they will. So, we don't know exactly how they spent that money, but there have been throughout the development of the game, there have been some concerns that they were not handling the money very well, which is an opinion. It's an opinion's not right or wrong. It's an opinion. So, you know, some people have that opinion, some didn't. Um, but yeah, they also cast Rob Paulson, who is probably best known for voicing Pinky from Pinky and the Brain. And there was one casting decision which was a no-brainer, or it seemed like a no-brainer. Gary Owens, who was the narrator for Space Quest 4. Not the voice of Roger, but the narrator for Space Quest 4, and I believe Space Quest 6 as well. Obviously, a very well-established presence in the Space Quest games because he played the narrators in the two voiced Space Quest games. So the fact that Gary Owens was willing to sign on for Space Venture, like I said, it seemed like it was a very obvious decision to hire him as the narrator of Space Venture. Seemed like a total no-brainer, but that also became the game's first big tragedy. Gary Owens passed away in 2015 at the age of 80 before he could do his voice work for the game. So, I mean, Gary Owens was a distinguished voice actor, had a great voice, had a great career. Again, he lived to 80, so he had a long and distinguished and hopefully happy life. But, that was the first, I guess, really big loss, the first really big setback for the project, the loss of Gary Owens, who would have been a great presence as the narrator in the game. And to be fair, I think the narrator who they got for Space Venture does a pretty good job. Like, I think he is a good narrator, but, it's just a little sad that Gary Owens didn't have the chance to do his one last little contribution to the two guys' work. But, okay. So, yeah, so that was kind of the first tragedy. And, but yeah, then they like I said, they started hitting problems with development, I think partly because of money. And like I said, again, a lot of you will say $500,000 is not a small amount of money. That's not a small budget. It's not a small budget game. And I guess the people, the two guys and the people doing the project probably thought the same thing. They probably thought, well, that's plenty of money, which is why they did some of the things that they did. But, the thing is, in any project, this is an absolutely global rule in pretty much any project. Money always disappears shockingly quickly, much more quickly than people expect it to. And I think the fact that I think most of the people on this project were doing Kickstarter for the first time. I think most of these people didn't have extensive experience working on Kickstarted projects before, so I think that probably contributed to the problem because when you're working for a company, the company's responsible for budgeting and allocating money, and if your project goes over budget, then the company probably has some extra money that they can allocate to the project if they feel like it's worth it. But if you're on a Kickstarter project, your project just has that one budget. That amount of money that you got is all the money that you're getting. There's no money after that. And if you run out, then you're really in trouble. And run out they did. I mean, again, I don't know exactly how the money went. We don't know because they didn't release public financial statements, public budgets, and they probably won't. So we'll probably never know exactly. But there's definitely been a long impression that the money was not handled, not maliciously. I don't mean to attribute any kind of malicious intent or like I'm not implying corruption. I'm not saying that people deliberately misused the money, nothing like that, but just that they maybe didn't know the best way to handle the money because again, new to Kickstarter and all that. But anyway, so things went on, and I don't remember the exact date on when this happened, but sometime like a couple of years into the project. Scott Murphy posted on one of the game's websites, I think not on the official Kickstarter site, but on some other website, which was like kind of like a blog or something for the site. I don't remember exactly where he posted it, but I remember reading a very long post somewhere from Scott Murphy about his mother, and it was very painful and sad to read. So Scott's mother was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he wrote a very detailed and painful description of how difficult it was to watch his mother, who had been, a very intelligent person, like really a very, she was a bright person, and just to watch her kind of decay and start doing, the things that people do when they start suffering from dementia, and just to have to watch that happen to his mother, it was very painful for him. And I sometimes wonder why he wrote it, because it was obviously a very sad story, but I don't know why he released all those details publicly. I don't know if he, on the one hand, maybe he's the kind of person who just lives a rather public life and describes his life publicly. But I don't know. On the one hand, he seems like a kind of a private person. Sometimes he seems like a very public person. It's hard to say. I think the reason why Scott wrote that, I think the reason why he wrote this big long description of what was happening with his mother, was because he had kind of gotten away from the Kickstarter project. After he had done most of the writing, because again, like I said, Scott was kind of the writer. He was the one who wrote most of the snarky text for the Space Quest game. So he wrote most of the text for Space Venture. And then he kind of had to leave the project for personal reasons. And the thing about one of the things about Kickstarter is, this will happen. People working on the project will have personal problems, personal tragedy in their personal lives. And because Kickstarter kind of forces people to be transparent about what they're doing, because again, when you're doing a Kickstarter project, you're playing with people's money. You've taken a lot of people's money, and people expect you to deliver. They expect you to deliver what they paid for. And if you just kind of disappear, it's people start saying, well, what happened? Like, why aren't we getting any more updates? So I think Scott felt the need to kind of post this big long thing about his mother as kind of an excuse, as sort of an explanation to state why he had to step away from the project for a while, why he felt the need to, and not only Scott, but I think in general, this happens with a lot of people. Kickstarter kind of not necessarily forces people, but at least sort of puts people in a situation where they feel like they're forced to reveal details about their private lives to justify why they aren't working on the project or haven't been working on the project because they aren't able to work on the project because of personal reasons. So Scott kind of fell out of the project after a couple of years in a very very painful and very sad way. And it's funny because Mark Crow in this regard is almost exactly the opposite of Scott. So Mark also lost his mother during the development of Space Venture, but as far as I know, he never said anything publicly about it. Mark's a very private person. He does not like to talk about his private life, which is fair. I mean, he doesn't have to, but. There's a strong contrast between Mark, who really didn't say a lot. I mean, he made a few videos showing what they were doing with the project in the early days, but things started slowing down. After like 2 or 3 years, things started slowing down, and there were less updates. It didn't seem like a lot was happening, and it seemed like Scott had kind of disappeared. And it got kind of strange because Scott has a Twitter feed. Many of you know Scott has a Twitter. And he is very active there. Like, he's been pretty active on his Twitter account. He tweets a lot, writes a lot about his views on politics, writes a lot about going on hikes because he likes to go hiking in the forest, posts pictures of things that he finds in nature or other things that he finds amusing, like on TV or movies or in the news or whatever. I mean, I guess it's a pretty normal Twitter feed in some ways. But Scott comes across, and I'm going to be kind of critical now. I hate to be critical of Scott, but I'm going to be as honest as I can. Scott comes across as a little bit difficult to work with. He is very vocal about things he doesn't like. It's funny because he's pretty friendly with his fans. Like, you'll see on his Twitter feed, like, fans will post things and say, oh, thank you for, the Space Quest games. I love the Space Quest games as a kid. It's so nice to, just want to thank you for that contribution to my childhood. And Scott's very gracious with his fans. Like, he's always happy to, chat with them about Space Quest and, tell them, give them a little bit of inside information about, behind the scenes stuff about development. And, that's very cool. It's very nice. It's very nice that he's in touch with his fans that way. But on the other hand, Scott is also very vocal about things he doesn't like, and particularly about politicians. I mean, Scott's very leftist, which is not a bad thing, but he's very he gets very angry and very vocal about things that he doesn't like. So like he will often kind of explode on his Twitter and say things like, "Well, f this person and f that. I just can't stand this kind of thing," which I guess mirrors the sentiment of a lot of people in these times or in any time. I mean, there've always been people with those kinds of feelings towards the current thing, as I guess we say in the current era of the internet. But I get the impression, I don't know Scott personally, but I get the impression that he's not a guy who likes to compromise. And the thing is, when you're working in a team, sometimes you have to compromise. There will be differences of opinion, the classic creative differences, as they call it. And when you're in a team and you want to do this and other people want to do that, there will be differences. That's inevitable, and you have to kind of be willing to compromise. You have to be willing to say, okay, let's chat it out, let's talk it out, and decide what we're going to do. But I get the feeling that Scott doesn't handle um, adversity. Adversity is not really the right word. Not conflict, maybe disagreement or compromise. I guess you could say he doesn't seem to be very willing to compromise on a lot of things, which will lead to trouble. And I get the feeling that might have been one of the reasons for the original split, why the two guys originally had a very acrimonious falling out in the 1990s. It's actually, it's kind of funny. Some of you may remember that Inside Copy video. There's a sort of a mock news video, like a fake news video about like life at Sierra. It was called Inside Copy. I think it's still on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and search like Inside Copy Sierra or something, you should find it. But what was funny about the video, and what I didn't really think about much at the time, was that a lot of people in the video commented specifically on Scott Murphy and said that Scott was very difficult to work with. And again, I didn't think much of it at the time, but in retrospect, I hate to make this comparison. I'm very sorry. Like, I apologize for making this comparison. This is not a fair comparison. I feel a little bit bad saying this, but I just say this because it's the only similar example that I can think of. If you think of Harvey Weinstein, the guy who, was jailed for sexual abuse of the whole story. I mean, I'm not going to talk about that, but most of you probably know who he is. If you don't, you can look him up. But Harvey Weinstein, the thing about Harvey Weinstein though was, it was sort of an open joke for years. Like, people would joke about Harvey Weinstein. People would tell jokes about how difficult it is to work with Harvey Weinstein. And I think people didn't really think much of it at the time. They just kind of laughed it off and said, ha ha, yeah, he's a difficult to work with guy. Ha ha, lol, funny joke. And it was only later that people really kind of woke up to the realization, oh, wait, he's not just hard to work with. He's actually abusive. He's actually sexually manipulating people. Okay, that's actually a crime. Okay, okay, it's not funny anymore. So again, I feel very bad making this comparison. I'm sure Scott wouldn't feel flattered by this comparison. But I don't mean that he's a villain or an abuser like Harvey Weinstein. I just mean that it's kind of the same thing. When you watch the video, when you watch the Inside Copy video, it seems like a joke. Like, everybody's saying, "Oh yeah, it's Scott Murphy. Oh man, I just everybody just doesn't like to work with him. He's so difficult." And it seems like a joke. It's played off as a joke. But when you look back and kind of think about it, how it seemed back then, and think about how it seems now, you realize, oh, that probably wasn't a joke. There probably were a lot of people who didn't get along with Scott. And on the one hand, I know how Scott feels, because I also don't like to compromise. I mean, who does? Who likes to compromise? Who likes to give up some of their principles or desires or something like that? I mean, nobody likes to compromise. Compromise basically means you're giving up something that's important to you. But again, when you're working in a team, when you're working on something that's not just being made by you, you have to compromise at some point. There will be creative differences. You do have to be willing to let things go. And I think Scott's generally not willing to do that. That's just how he comes across to me. I'm not here to put down Scott or say that he's a bad person. I have all respect for Scott, because I love the Space Quest games. And it's not just that he made the Space Quest games. It's not just he was part of the games. I mean, I'm sure he's a decent person. Like I said, I don't know him personally, but I'm sure he's not a bad person. I'm not trying to imply that he is. I just mean that he seems like he can be difficult. It got to the point where Scott actually eventually removed any mention of Space Venture from his Twitter account. When he was in the project, he actually hit part of his Twitter bio said, I made Space Quest. I'm currently working on Space Venture, and he actually removed all mention of Space Venture from his Twitter feed, which seemed to imply pretty strongly that he was really out, like he had really quit the project. As far as I can tell, he had finished most of the writing at that time. It seems like most of the writing in the game is Scott's writing, so he got that part done before he quit. But yeah, in the last few years, I think it seemed like he had really just completely disassociated himself with the project. Probably had very little, if any, contact with Mark Crow or any of the other people in the project. And so they probably went back to their previous state of being angry at each other and not talking to each other, which is, of course, very, very sad. Um, but yeah. And what also is kind of hard is when you look at Scott's Twitter and you look at how he talks about those old games. It is kind of sad to see how Scott remembers the games. He has denigrated a lot of the games he worked on his Twitter, saying he regrets them because they're racist or they're sexist or whatever. I mean, he did some work on the Police Quest games, and he regrets Police Quest because it's cops, F the police, ACAB. They're racist because a lot of the people whom you arrest in the game are non-white people. And he has denigrated Space Quest as sexist because there's like in Space Quest 4 you have the latex babes of Estros and stuff like Beatrice's last name is Wankmeister, and he just feels really ashamed for that. Which, I looking back, I understand. Okay, yeah, you can say, okay, Wankmeister, probably not the best name, probably not the most politically correct name, but it's literally like the name of one character, and it's not even repeated much throughout the game because that's her last name. Usually she's called Beatrice by her first name, so it's not that prominent in the game. I feel like it is a little bit, just a little bit. I don't know if I should say extreme, but a little bit unreasonable to denigrate the games that you worked so hard on just because one of the characters has a last name Wankmeister. Yeah, you can say it's questionable, but and even Scott's female fans. I mean, there are female, there are women who post on Scott's Twitter as well, and even they will usually say, hey, don't beat yourself up over a few things like that. The games aren't really that sexist. Yeah, okay, there are a few things like the latex babes of Estros, which obviously play off like a typical, again, B-movie cliches, like the kinds of things you would see in a silly science fiction B-movie back in the days of movies like Plan 9 from Outer Space. But the games aren't really that offensive to women or anyone else. I mean, there's a little bit of edgy humor, but it's not even that edgy. It's not that offensive. Like, I don't think that most women who play computer games will really be offended by the fact that there's a sub-game called Latex Babes of Estros, or that one of the women has the surname Wankmeister. Like, it's not, you can say it's a little bit questionable, but it's not that bad. But yeah, so yeah, for several years after around, I estimate like 2015 or so, it seemed like development on the game had stopped. The Kickstarter updates just kept saying, the game's almost done, we're very close to releasing it. And that was encouraging, of course, but considering that the updates just kept saying that, and they didn't provide a lot of further details, it started to become suspicious. You can say something like, the game's almost done once or twice, but when that becomes a message that you just keep repeating over a course of several years, people stop believing you. And it certainly didn't help that these updates didn't really get into specifics. They mostly didn't say what was actually being done right now. They just said the game's so close to being done, just a little longer, it'll be out soon. So, yeah, there was a lot of bad sentiment towards the people working on the game at that time. Like I said, things started off being very optimistic, very full of hope for the future, and then things really went south. Sometime around, I don't know, I don't remember exactly when it was, 2018 maybe. I'm just guessing. Feels like something like that maybe. Um, just to give you an idea of how bad it got, I think it was around that time, around 2018, that it was revealed that Scott Murphy, had been diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer, and which is, of course, a horrible thing to happen to anyone. And Scott is, I guess, not insured. He's not a wealthy guy. He doesn't work in a like an insured position. I think he had no health insurance, and so they started a GoFundMe to fund his cancer treatment. And somebody on the forums, like somebody in the comments of the Kickstarter page, actually said something like, "I hope he really has cancer." Like basically implying that maybe the cancer was a ploy to get money. Like they were just, he had just claimed to have cancer to get money from fans, um, and saying something like he'd better really have cancer, implying either that he was just making up a story to get money, or maybe just maliciously saying, yeah, I hope he has cancer, something like that. I mean, that's like the level of the kinds of comments that you would get there. Like the whole time for the past several years, for the whole like latter half of the game's development, the Kickstarter forums were just a huge dumpster fire. And I don't want to get into details. I don't want to list specific names. People who were a part of that community will I'm sure remember some very specific names of people who were rather disruptive in that community. But honestly, just some of the most hateful and cruel comments I've ever seen on the internet ended up in the Space Venture comments from people who were angry. And I mean, I've been on the internet a long time. I've seen a lot of the internet. I've seen a lot of bile. And these were really like just some of the most horrible things that I've ever seen said about anyone on the internet. And I can understand people's anger. It's understandable when you've contributed $500,000. Well, nobody contributed $500,000 individually. That 500,000 was the sum of people's contributions. But a lot of people put in, some people put in hundreds or thousands of dollars individually. So I can understand people are angry when they put money into something and you don't get updates. It's a common problem on Kickstarter. When people stop getting enough updates, they get angry. But so I can understand being angry, but I don't understand this hateful and mean-spirited commentary that comes out. I mean, I don't think that was justified at all. I mean, I can't really think of a situation where that is justified. I understand being angry. It's understandable to be angry, but it's just unbelievable that well, again, I'm not going to get into specifics, but anyway. And since I've leveled some criticism at Scott Murphy, here I think one could kind of criticize Mark Crow a bit, because again, this is just rumor. This is something I don't know Mark personally either, but from what I understand, the general sort of sentiment on the forums was that the radio silence on the Kickstarter site, the lack of any concrete updates, was at least partly due to Mark Crow. As I've said, Mark is almost the opposite of Scott, whereas Scott will readily type up pages of text expressing how he really feels, telling like a whole story about something that happened. Mark Crow tends to be rather sparse with his words. I guess he thinks that bombarding people with a lot of pointless information is unprofessional. Excuse me. Which is not without basis. I mean, I guess Mark wants to be like a more professional and give people relevant information, but not just give them like too much fluff. So there were rumors that Mark was the one who decided not to send out too many updates or include too much information in the updates because it would show a rather troubled project, and he didn't want to show that face of the project to the public. Now I can understand where he was coming from. You don't want to show people just problem after problem, like sad story after sad story. But the thing is, this is something, I'm going to say something which I think a lot of people don't understand about Kickstarter. The reason why people put money into Kickstarter, the reason why people invest in Kickstarter potential projects is not just to get the finished product. Obviously, yes, people wanted Space Venture. That's part of the reason why they put money into it. But it's not just about the finished product. Kickstarter is very much about the journey. It's not just I mean, it is about the destination too, but it's also very much about the journey. People back a project on Kickstarter not just because they want the final product, the finished product. Of course, they want that too, but they also want to be taken on a journey with you, on an adventure with you. If you're building something that people are interested in, they want to see what you're doing. They want to share that experience and that energy and that excitement of creating something new. They want to share that experience with you. And that's really what Kickstarter is about. I have seen projects on Kickstarter which failed because they ran out of money or couldn't be completed for technical reasons or whatever reasons. But people still often felt like it was worth the whole experience, because even if you don't succeed, even if the Kickstarter project failed, which is always a risk, that attempt to do something, the effort that you put into the project, and the experiences that you have while working on that project are what people want to see and hear and share and experience. So if you just keep saying, we're almost done, that starts to ring hollow after a while. People will get upset. And of course, they did get upset. And like I said, some people extremely so. And, it didn't help when, I think it happened, I forget exactly when, but at some point it happened that Chris Pope, the guy who had, again, been handling the public communications for Space Venture, he was like the PR guy for the project, he just suddenly deleted his Facebook. I don't know if he deleted his personal Facebook page. I think he deleted the page that he had been maintaining relating to Space Venture. I don't remember the details, but like he just suddenly, the Facebook page for Space Venture just suddenly disappeared. I'm sorry, I don't remember the details. Maybe someone else can fill them in better than I can, but it happened sometime, I think, towards the end of the project. He just disappeared. Chris Pope just vanished and stopped commenting on the game, stopped giving any information about the game, which led to a public perception that the project had just been abandoned. That obviously, led to many people believing, okay, if even Chris Pope, like the PR guy, just disappears, that probably means the project's really over. It's just been abandoned, and we're never gonna hear the end of it. And by the way, Chris Pope also lost his mother during the development of Space Venture, just in case there wasn't enough tragedy in this story. So I don't know what happened. A lot of this drama happened in a non-public way. And, so we'll probably never know all the things that happened. We'll probably never know the whole story. I guess we don't need to. But it's clear that there was a lot of drama. There was a lot of fighting and disagreement between the people involved in the project. And that led to a huge lack of communication with the backers who were waiting for the game. And that led to a lot of fighting between the backers. They fought with each other as well in the comments. So it just turned into a very... I think that was one of the biggest tragedies, is just that, something which had started as something very fun and friendly and like a nice community centered around people who were sharing their good memories of Space Quest became something very negative, very, very antagonistic. I'm not like a very positive person. I don't know how I come across in my YouTube videos, but I'm not somebody who always tries to look on the bright side. I mean, that's why I'm making this video. Like, I'm making this video to kind of tell the truth. I don't think I'm a pessimist, but I try to give my honest opinion. If I don't like something, I'll say, you know what, this is crap. I don't like this. I think you've seen that several times. So I'm not necessarily a very positive person. I try to be fair. I try to not beat people up too much for mistakes that they made, for things they've done wrong, but I will not withhold criticism if I think that people have made a mistake. So, I'm not somebody who always tries to put a happy face on everything, tries to always put everything in a positive light. I'm not like that. But even I who have a history of sometimes being very negative, even I was just horrified by some of the things that I saw happening in the community there. It just was, for me, it was unspeakable. That something that was basically a community centered around just like a series of fun little computer games, that it had become something so vile and so cruel. So yeah, it stayed like that for years. We hardly got any further information on Space Venture. We got we just got a new update like every 6 months or so saying the game is almost done, it's close to release. And that's incredibly frustrating. It was maddening. And then all of a sudden, in July of 2020, the beta for Space Venture was released. I think it was, I forget what the conditions for beta were. It went out to certain people who had paid extra money to be beta testers. So beta testers got their hands on the game in July of 2020. And that was a good sign because they came back and confirmed it's a real game. Like, contrary to some people's perceptions that nothing had been done on the game for like 5 years, there was a real game. It was a playable game. You could actually play it all the way from beginning to end. It was very buggy. I mean, the beta testers basically reported two things. One, they reported the game was very buggy. There were several game-breaking bugs on almost every screen. But secondly, they reported the game was actually okay. Maybe not worth waiting 10 years for, but what game really is. But they reported that it was something nice, which Space Quest fans will probably enjoy. If you keep your expectations in check, a lot of people said you'll probably have some fun with it. Seems like something you might have fun with for a couple of hours, and that helped a bit because it suggested again that there really was a game there, which was almost done. That the project managers hadn't been lying to people for years, and that there really was a game which was in a sufficiently finished state that people were playing it from start to finish. So I think it was it late last year, earlier this year? I think it was late last year in 2021. They said the big problem that we still have now, we've been getting a lot of feedback from beta testers. We've fixed a lot of the bugs they've been reporting. But the big problem that we have now is the save game system. They said they basically developed the game without planning the save game system, figuring that they would add the ability to save your game later. And they said, now we have a problem. It's not that easy to incorporate a save game system into a game that doesn't have one. Now, that may sound silly. If you're not a game developer, you might think, well, that's stupid. I mean, just putting in the ability to save your game, how much work is that? The thing is, an experienced game developer who has actually written a game with a save system can tell you, and some of them did, some people did say this in the Kickstarter comments, it's not easy to put in a save system into a game that doesn't have one. It's especially difficult if you've already written the whole game without a save system. What you're supposed to do is, as you're developing the game, keep track of the variables which you'll need to save and load when saving and loading the game. Do that during the development of the game. But again, this team of developers, even though they'd made the Space Quest games in the past, that was something very different because Sierra had a team of programmers who were familiar with the AGI and SCI engines, which Sierra developed internally. They had a team of programmers who knew what they were doing. And, Mark and Scott mostly, I guess, wrote the story for the games. They didn't do all the programming on Space Quest as far as I know. So they did have a couple of programmers, but Space Venture was done in Unity. And Unity is... it is very, very complex. I myself have tried to make games in Unity, and I've realized very quickly, Unity is... the thing about Unity is it's extremely versatile, which is why so many games use it. Like, unbelievably many games today, even professional, like maybe not AAA games, but most non-AAA games use Unity actually for their engines. First-person games, third-person games, role-playing games, action games, adventure games, simulation games. Unity is incredibly flexible. But the reason why it's so flexible is because it's very, I guess I should say, as a result of that flexibility, it's very easy to paint yourself into a corner, if that makes sense. It's very easy to do something which works well, but is going to involve a huge amount of time and effort to to change if you want to change it later. So, a system like AGI or SCI, which keeps track of variables internally and probably saves them automatically if you try to save the game, to add a save game system to a game like that, which wasn't designed with a save system as it was developed, that is an enormous amount of work. It is hard to imagine. If you're not a programmer, it's hard to imagine how much work that could be. But that's one of the most difficult, probably one of the most difficult things you can do as a game programmer is add a save system to a game that doesn't have one, because that means you're going to have to pull out all the data that needs to be saved, and handle different cases and different ways that the data can change between saves and things like that. I'm not going to explain how it all works here, but it's very difficult to do. And so putting these people who are working on Space Venture, putting them into a situation where now they they weren't just doing the art and the design and the dialogue of the game, they also had to do the programming. This was really treading into unfamiliar territory, and making a game with Unity is very, very, very different from making a game with the AGI and SCI adventure engines that these guys knew from Sierra. And I think they were all surprised by just how hard it is to, first of all, to build a game in Unity at all, and how hard it is to suddenly add a save and restore system into a game which wasn't programmed to have one. So adding that save system took almost a year. Or maybe it was more than a year. It was about a year. I don't remember exactly how much time, but it was about a year. And of course, the comments kept coming and saying, this is ridiculous. How long does it take to add a save system? It can't take a year to add a save system. Well, I think it can. And you have to understand, the people who were working on the game at this time, they were kind of doing it part-time. The money had run out. There was no more budget to pay programmers and professional Unity programmers and whatever. Those people had long since moved on. As far as we can tell, Space Venture was at that point being developed by a skeleton team of people doing the game in their spare time. They were no longer doing it as a job. They had been forced, for budgetary reasons, because the budget was gone, they had been financially forced to move on to other jobs, and any work done on Space Venture was being done, at night, at home, or on weekends, when they really should have been spending time with their families or hobbies or whatever. But just out of goodwill, people were trying to finish the game in their spare time, which you can imagine means that development went excruciatingly slowly. That's why it took so long to finish the game. Anyway, so in late August of this year, 2022, the announcement suddenly came. The game was finished and would be released on September 16th, 2022. And it was. The game was released on September 16th. They didn't lie. The game is out now. And the last kind of sad part of the story was when the final announcement came out that the game was going to be released on September 16th, there remained the question of what would happen with the physical rewards. The developers hadn't just promised to finish the game itself. There were also several physical rewards which were to be delivered to the backers when the game was finished. And these varied depending on how much money people had pledged, of course. Lower-end backers got things just like posters or postcards or stuff like that. Some of the higher-tier perks included things like actual physical buckazoids, which, for those who don't know, is the currency, the money from Space Quest. There were other rewards like a printed concept art book with concept art from the game. One of the particularly expensive perks was an actual nose which you could wear, like those long noses, like those kind of pig noses, which the two guys from Andromeda are always seen wearing when they're in character. They actually made like this little pig snouts like that, which people can wear. So that was one of the rewards. And tragically, and again, this one is pretty sad, one of the backer rewards was a personally recorded message from Gary Owens. Obviously, that's not going to be possible to deliver on now. And I think 3 people, according to the Kickstarter site, 3 people actually bought that level of backing. So yeah, there's nothing to be done about that now. But there remains a lot of physical merchandise and swag that needs to be sent out to people. And besides the obvious manufacturing cost of making all this stuff, getting T-shirts printed and books printed and things like that, there are also the shipping costs. Space Venture was backed in total by, I think, 10,809 people. That's 10,809 people who put in money to support the game's release. And while not all of those people will be getting physical rewards, I think some of them just paid to get a digital copy of the game. Let's imagine you had to make and ship the game DVDs and game boxes and ship them all to all those people. Let's imagine that costs of manufacturing and shipping for each person are like $10 per copy per person. It's probably more than that, but let's just start by imagine they cost $10 per person to make a DVD and print a game box and then ship them to somebody. That alone is $100,000 right there, just to make and ship the game DVDs and game boxes and ship them to all those people. And like I said, the costs are probably more than $10. So if we imagine it's like maybe $20 per person, that's $200,000 right there to ship them to 10,000 people. That $200,000 just in cost of fulfilling physical delivery. $200,000 is almost half of the total amount that was pledged. And again, not all those 10,000 and some people will be getting physical rewards. So you don't have to ship stuff to all of those 10,000 people. But still, the point is a lot of people will need to be getting physical things shipped to them. And so a huge chunk of that money that was raised, a huge chunk of that $500,000 that was raised, had to basically be held in reserve. That money was untouchable and unusable for the game's development because it needed to be held for the purpose of manufacturing and shipping the physical products to accompany the game. And that probably partially explains why they had money problems, because it's well and good to offer nice rewards on Kickstarter and say you can get a T-shirt or a pig, like a funny pig nose or whatever. It attracts people and it gives them incentive to invest money in your project. But then when the project is finished, guess what? Now you do actually need to make those physical things and ship them to people, and that gets expensive. That cuts into your budget, and it means you can't just use the money which was pledged on development, because a lot of the money that was raised has to be held in reserve because it needs to later go toward delivering things physically to people. And they've admitted publicly they don't have the money for all the physical rewards. Like they have a lot of the physical rewards they have already, but they actually don't have enough money to ship them. Because again, shipping all those, if you imagine, even if it's just like $10 per person, I think it's probably more, but even if it's $10 per person, shipping things for $10 a pop to 10,000 people, that's $100,000. So, shipping gets expensive when there's that many people involved. So there is going to be an attempt to plug that budgetary gap with Steam sales. The plan is, so again, right now, Space Venture is only available through, I think they're distributing it using itch.io, which is a popular platform for indie developers to get, to let people download the games and allow people to chuck in like a few bucks if they want to tip the game designer with $2 or $3 while downloading the game. But there is a plan to release the game on Steam later for the price of $15. I don't know when that'll happen. There's no official date for that. I'm hoping we won't have to wait years for that to happen, but who knows. So the idea is that whatever they can't ship now, they'll release the game on Steam, and they're not going to keep that money. They're going to actually take whatever money they get from Steam sales and put it toward fulfillment of physical goods, so physical delivery of physical rewards to the Kickstarter backers. I don't know how well that will work out because, well, at this point in the video, I expected to say that the last part of this rather sad story is that we didn't get a very good game. A lot of people said, the worst part will be when the game comes out. It's going to be a terrible game. Again, I haven't played the game myself. I don't have the game. I have seen it, part of it, and honestly, it doesn't look that bad to me, in my opinion. Honestly, I was expecting worse. It's a good-looking game. I mean, the art style is actually pretty cool. It's nothing super high-tech. It's nothing, it's not going to compete with Crisis 2000 or what, I don't know, what's a game now that has really great looking graphics. I don't know, I can't think of one, but whatever games, whatever is the current thing, whatever is the current really snazzy looking cool game, it's not going to hold a candle to something like that, but it's actually a pretty good looking game. I like the art style. The voice acting, of course, is pretty cool. The choice to get professional voice actors may have been questionable from a budgetary perspective, but it certainly always resulted in some pretty cool voice acting. Um, there have been complaints that some of the puzzles are either too simple or just not much fun. The game is very buggy, but bugs can be fixed. But I think the overall problem is just that a lot of people have said the game's kind of underwhelming. I don't know if that's just people being entitled. I don't know, it's hard to say. I think the game looks okay. I've seen like a playthrough of the first few scenes of the game. It looks okay. Like, I probably wouldn't give it the Game of the Year award, but it actually seems like a fun game. I don't see anything obviously wrong with it. I don't see any reason to denigrate it. I mean, was it worth waiting for 10 years for? No, probably not, but it seems like a pretty all right game, in my opinion, from what I've seen. So, I don't know. Unfortunately, public response to the game has been bad because the game is very buggy. The game has a lot of bugs which prevent you from doing something or make it difficult to do things. Sometimes you have to leave a screen and come back because you can't do what you need to do until you leave and come back. Some things don't work. Like, I mean, bugs, software bugs in a game. They happen, and there are a lot of them. There are quite a lot of them because, again, developing in Unity is very, very difficult. Developing in Unity is an insane amount of work. It's very flexible, it's very powerful, but with that power comes the need to put an enormous amount of work into making Unity work. It is a very challenging, very intensive experience making games in Unity. When it works, the results are great. You can get great results with it, but it is a very intense experience making games with Unity. It requires a lot of work and dedication. So, fixing the bugs will probably take a long time, and I don't think they'll want to release on Steam before they fix the bugs because otherwise they'll get negative reviews on Steam and then probably won't sell many copies of a negatively reviewed game. So, who knows when we'll get a Steam release. I'll say right now, I won't be playing it on YouTube. I have learned that I don't get along very well making Let's Plays of nostalgia games because they tend to do too much with the formula. I like the looks of Space Venture. Having not played it myself, I can only say it looks like an okay game to me. Not a great game, but it looks like an okay game that's fun to play. But I don't think I'm the right person to make a Let's Play of it, so I'm not planning to I will not be doing a YouTube video Let's Play of Space Venture. In fact, this video that I'm just talking in now will probably be my last video about Space Venture because I've already talked a lot about it. I made an announcement video saying it's about to be released. I did a stream on Space Venture a couple of days ago, and now I'm doing this whole long kind of post-mortem, if you will, of the game's development. So I think I've said enough about it. I will leave it for other people to Let's Play the game and put videos of it on YouTube if they want to. I won't be... I may play Space Venture when it comes out on Steam personally, but I won't play it on YouTube. I won't play it publicly. Just getting that out there. But it really does look like an okay game. So I think the result of all this is not as disappointing as I was expecting it to be. The game is all right. Like I said, not a great game, but something that you can have some fun with. And hopefully the bugs will get fixed and it will become more stable, more playable. As time goes by, and then ideally it'll get a Steam release, and then, like I said, the Steam sales will plug some of that budget gap, which will allow the final physical rewards to be delivered to people, and then whatever's left over, the developers hopefully can then make a little bit of profit after 10 years of diligently trying to get this game out in their spare time. So yeah, that's the story of the development of Space Venture as told by me. Again, other people will tell the story very differently, probably. That's my retelling of the story based on what I know. You're welcome to put comments or further details or corrections in the YouTube comments below. And I know I mentioned this in my announcement video when I was walking around in the forest with a camera, but I'll just say this again. If you, the game, the contrast between Space Venture and Ken's game is very strong. Ken Williams, who was the president of Sierra back in the day, is working on a game called, I think it's called Colossal Cave 3D, which is due to be out very soon now. And I'll withhold judgment on that game. It doesn't seem that impressive to me because it's literally just like a 3D remake of an old text adventure, which Sierra did a lot of. Sierra actually took a lot of old text adventures and redid them because the first Space Quest is very much like a graphical remake of Planetfall from Infocom. The first Leisure Suit Larry game is a graphical remake of a text adventure, which was just called, I think it was just called Soft Porn Adventure or something like that. So Sierra does this a lot. Ken really likes to take old classic text games and put graphical faces on them, which is not bad in itself. But I would have liked to have seen a new intellectual property from him. But I guess he felt that it was more, I don't know, whatever. But anyway, the thing is, Ken's game took about a year to make. It's also being made in Unity, and it looks a lot more professional, I think, than Space Venture. And obviously it got done, pretty much within the development time frame. I mean, maybe the development dragged on longer than Ken was planning, but it didn't go on for 10 years. The game's basically done, ready for release, or very close to being released. And that all in maybe a little over a year compared to more than 10 years for Space Venture. So I think it really speaks to the importance of management in projects like this. It's great to be indie. It's great to be in an independent studio making games without the demands of corporate overlords telling you, work faster, work harder, when's your game going to be done. But you can very easily get into a trap where it's just really difficult to put together the resources and the right project plan to get something done on time. I mean, I'm not accusing the developers of laziness. Like I said, I think a lot of it was just that they ran out of money and had to go back to other jobs and finish Space Venture in their spare time. But there is a certain importance to having somebody who understands business management. I understand the sentiment that many people have about managers, where people just say managers are just fat and lazy people who don't do anything. They just get paid to sit in an office and watch the money roll in, which may be sometimes true, but very often managers are absolutely critical to getting something done, because managers are the ones who, have the broader view, like the sort of broader overview of everything that's happening and understand where things are going, where time's being wasted, where resources are not being used or utilized to the best of their potential, and being able to recognize those gaps in planning and correct them is part of the job of a manager. So I think the Space Venture team didn't have that. They didn't have good management, and that's part of why it took them more than 10 years to finish the game. So, kind of a contrast there. So yeah, that's it. Again, that's the story of Space Venture, and I'm just going to put this out there. As I speak, Scott Murphy is 67 years old. In fact, I think he's turning 68 next month. Which in itself doesn't really mean much, but I'm pretty sure at this point, again, the drama has not been made very public, but I'm pretty sure right now that Mark and Scott are not talking to each other anymore. Whatever disagreement they had in the 1990s that led to them not talking to each other for something like 20 years, I think that old sort of separation has come up again, and it seems like they're not on speaking terms. So my point here is, I think it's safe to say that we will never see another game from the two guys from Andromeda. So Space Venture is their last game. It is very likely the last game that we will ever see from the two guys from Andromeda. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at it, because again, even if it's not the best game you've ever played, it is their last game. It is the last thing that they will bring to the world together, and I think it's very special just for that reason alone. And I mean, again, as a game, it doesn't seem that bad. It's buggy. It's clearly buggy. There are some things, the interface, the user interface, the way that some of the things work. It's buggy, um, but it's a nice looking game. Take a look at it. I would encourage you to take a look at it. I think it's not that bad. It may be disappointing to some people, but it's not a horrible game. It's just it's a game that needs a little bit more polish. Some people have said it still feels like a beta, and I guess it probably is. It probably was not beta tested very well, but it is what it is. Anyway, I'm done here. I am done talking about Space Venture. Thanks for listening, everyone. Again, if you have anything to add, feel free to, comments are open. Feel free to add whatever you want in the comments. I'm grateful to Mark and Scott for all they did, for the Space Quest games and for the work they've put in on Space Venture. And whatever happened, whatever sort of disagreements they might have had, whatever sort of disappointments or conflicts or upsets might have occurred along the way, none of that matters now. It's all in the past. There's no sense in bury the hatchet. It's water under the bridge. Just let it slide. Just let it go. Take a look at Space Venture. It seems like a cool game, and let's be grateful for what we have. Let's be thankful that that we live in a time where we can experience and enjoy that game, and of course the Space Quest games as well. You can go back and play the Space Quest games too. So, all right, that's it. That's all for me. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care, and I will talk to you later. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye for now.